I'd taken the night off because it was a Saturday in May. This is actually Saturday of the Kentucky Derby and the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. I was literally sitting in my living room, texting back and forth with people, and the last text that Brian and I exchanged was actually about the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight, about who we thought was going to win. He may or may not stop by that night if he was going to get out of work. And then while I was getting my house in order for everything, I got a call from a friend of mine here that works in the 105, Morgan Sprague. He gave me a call and just flat out said, you know, drop what you're doing, get to the hospital, Brian got shot.
My son had just been born a few days earlier, and I had taken vacation, obviously, to be home with my family. So I started getting phone calls at home, initially with a lot of conflicting information. We weren't sure really what had happened. And I just remember that panicked feeling that my brothers were in trouble, and I didn't know exactly what had happened yet. I remember leaving my house on Long Island and driving immediately to Jamaica Hospital and trying to talk to people on the phone, guys that were there, guys that were working on patrol, and trying to get some details. And I remember just pulling up to the hospital and running in and try to be by his side as much as I was able to be for those following days.
It was Saturday, a beautiful Saturday evening, and I was with Sergeant Chris Barbieri in the 105 squad office at the time, and we heard the radio transmission come over, and we just grabbed our vests, and I remember pulling up to the scene, and it was an overwhelming response of cops. There was a lot of 105 patrol guys that were there, and you could tell just from being a police officer all those years that it was severe. It was nothing that I've ever handled before or seen before. And unfortunately, when I got to the scene, I'd seen Officer Moore being helped by his fellow officers into another car to eventually be taken to the hospital.
I got a phone call. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I couldn't even process what was being said to me. They told me that one of my police officers was shot. He was shot in the face, and he was in bad shape. And I got a phone call very quickly after that from Jeff Madry, my counterpart in Brooklyn North, and he called me. He said, "Dave, get to the hospital." And I was already getting dressed. I always have a uniform laid out, and I put on my dress uniform. I responded to the hospital, and it was one of the worst days of my entire life.
I got a call from a sergeant who I knew in the 103 who called me, and it had literally just happened within seconds. And she advised me, I think the initial report may have been 2 cops were shot, but one definitely. And had a radio at home, PD radio, and I turned that out right away, and the radio was going crazy. So I was in my car and on my way within minutes of this happening. And I went directly to Jamaica Hospital. I literally flew down the belt to Van Wyck and to the hospital. When I first got there, I think shortly after I got there, I met Captain, I think it was a captain at the time, Seminario. He's a deputy inspector now. And he had been, I think at that time, he was the exec of the XO of the 103. And as a boss, he had a white shirt on, and his shirt was covered with blood. They'd moved Brian to the hospital in the back of an RMP. And when the RMP first pulled into Jamaica, quite frankly, they didn't even know it was Brian at that point, what was there. And the captain had opened the rear seat and saw the shape Brian was in. The captain was, I believe, a paramedic. I know he had some medical experience, and he knew right away that this was serious. And he helped get Brian into the emergency room, and I spent the evening at the hospital in the emergency room.
When I arrived at the scene, we wanted to get as good of a description of the perp as we can, direction of flight, that kind of stuff. Once we got it, we were able to try and track his direction of flight, secure the perimeter the best we could and preserve the crime scene as best we could, for the investigation.
Detective Kevin Goodspeed and Lenny Shulman took Brian's partner Eric Jansen back to the squad here to do identification procedures. While me and Detective Mike Cerullo, we canvassed the neighborhood to see if anybody heard anything or saw anything. We came up to a group of people. We asked them if they had heard or saw anything. They really weren't. They gave us a little bit of answers, but there was one gentleman in particular that wasn't saying anything at all. So I asked him, can you help me out? Did you hear anything? Did you see anything? He said he heard 3 shots and he was inside his house the whole time. I asked him for his name and he looked at me and said, my name is Anthony Blackman. At that point, there was probably hundreds of cops on scene. They pushed everybody back. The people that we spoke to went inside the house.
A crime scene had been secured. It's kind of chaotic. Cops moving around. There was a canvas. They were looking for the perpetrator. While we were at the scene, I received a text message from my former partner, Sean Ward, who retired, who used to work in the 105 squad, and it was a picture of the perpetrator, Demetrius Blackwell. I had the picture, and I actually was with Colin Sparks. I showed it to him, and he told me that he's like, yo, I just saw that guy. I said, where'd you see him? He goes, and I spoke to him in front of that house. He went into that house right there.
John Roberts had come up to me and said, listen, they identified, somebody back at the precinct and showed me a picture of who they identified, and it was one of the people that I just spoke to, the guy who said his name was Anthony Blackman, and his house was actually right on the street where we were. The emergency service unit was lining up on the house to hit the door. At about that time, I saw Lieutenant Klein had just made it to the scene. I told him that they were lining up on the wrong house because I just saw the perp go into a different house. He brought it to Chief Boyce's attention, and ESU then went to the house that we said he was in. They knocked on the door, told everybody to get out of the house.
The chiefs that were on the scene and ESU set up on the house, and they began removing each person from the house, one at a time. When Demetrius Blackwell made it to the doorway of the house, there was like a handicap ramp going up to the house. I walked through the yard, grabbed him, walked him back to the driveway, and Colin Sparks and I handcuffed him.
I was here in the squad. I supervised the lineup procedure with Brian's partner, Eric Jansen. After the lineup, after all was said and done, the investigation just continued. It didn't stop there. It went on for days. There was numerous videos that needed to be collected, people that needed to be spoken to, and all that needed to be wrapped up tight so that we can coordinate with the DA's office as far as what they needed, to really put this thing together.
I don't think a squad commander could be more proud of the supervisors he had working with him, the detectives he had working with him. Sergeant Barbieri, Sergeant KEEFER, they gave everything for this, and they really led this investigation, which came to a conclusion that got some justice for Brian and the family.
My wife and I were visiting our daughter in Connecticut when my BlackBerry described a shooting of a police officer. And I knew that it was very serious, and I began making calls, and I wasn't really getting much information. And then later that evening, I spoke with Jack Ryan, who was at the hospital. And Jack advised me that the early returns from the medical care that Brian received was that it looked like he had a chance. Brian was young, he was a perfect physical specimen. And if anyone had an opportunity, I think, to endure these kind of injuries, it was Brian. The next morning, leaving Connecticut, coming back, I spoke with Jack, and he told me that there'd been a turn, and things looked very grim. I was Judge Brown's liaison to the NYPD. I went to Jamaica Hospital and got off the elevator and where Brian was, and almost the entire 105 was there present, and the mood was despair. And it became very clear that Brian was not going to survive. Brian died the next day, and we were all present for the walkout. And it was as emotionally traumatic a thing as I had in my nearly 30-year career working in law enforcement.
Brian was a lot of fun as a child. He was always moving, always running and jumping and climbing. And, you know, I used to call him like my little monkey because he just was like nonstop and would climb on top of somebody and then take a flying leap off. And he had an awful lot of energy. And he really, you know, he was a typical boy, like, you know, all that kind of stuff. And he loved sports. He was on the Little League, and he really loved basketball also. So he played on the Maria Regina team as well as the school team. And he was really good at it. He was good at taking the foul shots. He was good at the three-pointers. And so that was always exciting to go and watch him play the games. He always had a very even disposition. He always was the type of person that makes you smile. And I remember one time when I went to one of those school nights where you get to meet the teacher, and this was probably in junior high, and every single teacher that I went to said to me, "Do you know that your son is like the classroom clown?" I said, "What? No, I didn't know this. He didn't tell me that this is what he does." And so when I came home that night, I was like, "Hey, come here, you. I have something to ask you. Since when did you become the class clown?" So, yeah, I think he always kind of wanted to make people laugh, and he really didn't take too much too seriously. So that was really to his benefit.
So Brian was obsessed with his Snapchat app, and he would be filming you when you least expected to be filmed. You'd be doing something, not thinking that anyone was even noticing what you were doing, let alone thinking that your friend is sitting there actually recording you. So what he would do was he'd record you at certain points throughout the day, and then later on in that day, he'd send that video out to 20, 30 people and include you on it, and then you'd be stuck there later in the day having to watch some video of you doing some ridiculous thing that you had no idea anyone even saw you doing.
The best way Brian should be remembered is as a friend, as you know, as a great person that would always make you smile, as a friend. I think I speak for the majority of the guys on our crime team at the time, and have worked for him, where best way you could describe him is like your little brother. He was like our little brother. I mean, that's how I viewed him. I have younger brothers. I looked at him as an extension of my family, and all the guys were just as protective of him, but he was a little brother that could piss you off sometimes and could make you laugh almost every other time.
He was always the type of guy with a smile on his face. He loved to crack jokes. Had a good time. He was the type of guy that would bring props to a party, whether it was wigs or a horse mask, to try to you know, make fun of other people, crack jokes. It was always fun to be around, and everybody looked for him when there was a party, because he was the, as they say, the life of the party.
Well, every moment with Brian was funny. You know, he's a character. Yeah, we had, he had made a really, really good arrest, which we have a great picture of. I hope it makes it into this video. And there's a big picture of all of us standing around the table with a bunch of guns, money and drugs that he was responsible for. He was a unique individual, and it was my honor to be the commanding officer and serve with him. You know, I mean, he's only 25 years old, so, you know, I did 30 years on the job, but it meant a lot to me. Cops like that don't come along every day.
He was a model son. I never had a problem with him. He was a great brother. He got along with my daughter, Christine, tremendously. He was a jokester. He always had a smile on his face. He was always laughing. He loved his dog, Smokey. He had friends. He was just an all-around guy. He played sports. He was a clean-cut kid. Everyone loved him. One thing that sticks out was just really between me and him was I was always a Baltimore Oriole fan, as you could see by some of these jerseys and stuff. So he grew up. He had no choice but being an Oriole fan. And when he was little, I would take him and the family to Baltimore. And then as he got older, we would go on road trips. And we'd go down there and we'd see the Orioles play. We'd stay overnight. We had such a good time, and that really sticks out. The last time we went was October before he passed away in May. And we had a great time, and we would do this a couple of times a year.
When we would have family dinners, and everybody's sitting around here, and I would be in the kitchen cooking, and Brian would make his way in and come and talk to me, and I'd be leaning against one counter, he was with the other counter, and he would tell me what was kind of going on in his life and different things like that. Yeah, it's very enjoyable. When Brian entered a room, you knew he was there. He would always go out of his way to make people feel comfortable and happy, and he'd wind up, everybody was always laughing when Brian was around. He enjoyed making people feel good.
You wanted him at your party, you wanted to go to the ball game with him, you wanted to talk about sports with him. Same for me. At my wedding, I had a lot of people there from my wife's side of the family from Ireland. Now, most people, they don't know someone, they're not going to talk to him. Not Brian. And you look over, like my dad probably says it better. He's out there introducing himself, having a good time, having a drink, making people laugh, and he was
a fun guy to be around.
Yes, you wanted to be around with him. And I tell you, there's a very good part of him. Would make you laugh, would talk to you, would listen to you, all around, great guy.
You would always want him at your house party, because not only was he a good guy, but he was fun and really loving.
You can, like I said, talk some sports about him, have some laughs with him, and he'll make you laugh no matter what.
His character, how he talked to people, he's just an overall really good guy and a guy you could depend on all the time. Police work or not, he was always there for you.
Brian was a great cop. Had a great eye for finding things, and more importantly, he could make me laugh for 8.5 hours a day, every day. Just his, the way he can make you laugh, like, certain songs would come on the radio and he'd do things, and even now to this day, certain songs come on the radio and I just, memories flood in about him, about how he used to make me laugh about that song. Just a fun guy to be around, I say it all the time, he'd make me laugh at home, at work, laying in bed, he'd text me something, make me giggle, that's just, how he was.
He was a lot of fun around family. He loved to be with his family, even when he had appointments to visit his friends after an occasion. He always stayed longer than was set out to be because he really enjoyed staying with his family and laughing with us and stories and having a really good time. He loved his family.
Look, it's just when you see the loss of somebody like this, he was born 3 days before my son was born. And when I first heard about it, I said, there, but for the grace of God, could have been my son sitting in that car doing what he was doing. You can't have something like this. Society cannot tolerate something like this. And the police department, their efforts in the investigation was a tremendous memorial to a fallen colleague. The quality of the investigation was so good and left no stone unturned that was as good a tribute as anything they could have done at his funeral or anywhere else. And I commend the police department for their efforts in that respect.
Brian was a hero. He did what cops do each and every day. He went towards a danger. He went after a dangerous individual armed with a gun, and he paid for it with his life, trying to keep the people of this city safe. That's how he should be remembered. We always have to remember what our heroes do, whether it's 5 years later. I remember that day like it was yesterday, May 2nd, 2015, responding out to 104th and 212th and 105. He was a hero. Whether it's 5 years later, whether it's 10, 15, or 50 years later, we will always remember Brian, and we will always remember his family. We'll remember his dad, Ray. We'll remember his mother, Irene. This is something that they are always part of our family. We made that vow to them 5 years ago, and that vow continues, and it will always continue. We never, ever forget our heroes.
Every day I think our cops across the city come into work and do God's work. and head out the door, not knowing what they're going to face. But they're not alone. They're following a long line of heroes, real heroes before them that took those same steps. And some of those heroes didn't come back. And you know, I think that's the legacy of, you know, you're not in this alone. We're part of a very rich tradition on this job of literally changing New York City. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen with anything that you read about, with a lot of people taking credit for it. It happened with sacrifice. And I think that's the legacy of Brian and many heroes like him, that were willing to give their life, to put themselves in harm's way so that people can have a better life.
You know, the kid like just went, he had me at a gun call like that Tuesday, like, and he came in with a smile. And that was the thing, like he came in with a smile, like that's how you knew who he was, you know? So all those pictures that you see of him, that's him, you know? You know how you got that person that comes to work and you enjoy, you look forward to it because you're gonna have a good day. You know, that person's there, we're gonna have a good day because we're gonna make the best of it. And I think that's what it was for that team. And overall, when you look at that crime team, they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. He was a unique individual, incredible, talented, bright future ahead. No telling how far he would have went on this job if given the opportunity. But unfortunately, we won't, and we will never know. Like I said, when I think of Brian, I think of a young man that gave. A young man that gave much to our police department and to our entire city. Every day he was with us, we were blessed. Brian's example of bravery and courage and devotion will never be forgotten. So when I think of Brian, I think about the celebration of his life, a life of a true hero, a life that inspired emulation, a life that burned so that the path of others could be lit. Brian's legacy will never be forgotten.
He should be remembered as a pillar within NYPD. You think about it, he came from a blue bloods family. His dad was a cop, his uncle was a cop. He was walking in their footsteps. He was already on his way up, probably to become a detective. You just hear some of the stories about his work ethic and how much of a go-getter he was. He'll never be forgotten. You know, one thing I will say about the NYPD, we do a phenomenal job of never forgetting those that pay the ultimate sacrifice. The one thing that Brian did was keep people in that part of Queens safe, and he took pride in it. Unfortunately, he was taken away from us too early, and he'll never be forgotten as somebody that really took pride in being the best he can within this great organization.
Brave, courageous, dedicated, professional. Think about the magnitude, the humanity of Brian risking his lives, like many cops do, giving his life for the city, sure, but in my eyes, it's for his fellow cop. Ripping a gun out the street from somebody's waistband, from a car. Yeah, it's what cops do. Sometimes people look at it like another gun off the streets. We stopped the shooting. We stopped the gunpoint robbery. I've always looked at it as that any cop, every cop. Brian, what he was doing when he got murdered, he was saving a cop's life. He gave up his life to save the life of one or many other cops. And every young cop that comes in this job should always remember that.
To encapsulate Brian's career and his sacrifice is that Brian is, you know, my brother. He's our brother. He's a brother of every police officer in the New York City Police Department, because what happened to Brian could happen to any of us at any moment, on any day, in any year. And many people are in the streets right now doing the work that Brian did, doing it heroically, and knowing the risk they take in doing the work that they're doing. And I think that's why it hits home to everybody. That's why every death, every sacrifice that we make really hits home, because we put ourselves in that role, in that position, and we feel that, and we feel it in a real personal way.
I think you should be remembered as a committed cop, basically a hero. And a lot of people use that word, throw it around, but a guy who gives his life for a job where people don't necessarily appreciate you for doing it, but he doesn't, does it anyway, that's a hero to me.
He's a hero. Simple.
New York City is definitely a safer place today because of the work that Brian Moore did.
Brian will be remembered, not should be remembered. Brian will be remembered as an incredible cop, a good, fine human being that really set an example for us all, putting himself in harm's way to protect the community and giving his life. No greater gift can a man give than to lay down his life for his friends. Brian laid down his life for this community, for all of us, and we will never forget that.
They should be remembering that he was a great police officer. He was a guy that was out in the streets. He was doing good against evil. That's what he was doing, and he got gunned down because of it. So we have to learn from how he carried himself with the pride as a police officer. So we have to respect the pride he had in his heart for being a police officer. We have to respect the pride he had because he was following in the footsteps of a father that was on the job. We have to remember that. But we also have to remember, and we have to honor. And that's what we'll be doing now as we approach the 5th anniversary of that terrible call we spoke of. And we have to remember that it's not only Brian we have to respect, it's not only Brian we have to honor, but his family too. Because his family then has to carry on each and every day with that pain that, quite frankly, never goes away. Some folks say there's closure. I don't believe that. I believe you get used to the pain. If they can get up each and every day and go on about their life with courage, that gives every police officer the courage to get behind the wheel of the radio car and do the difficult job that Brian was doing. So we should always remember that we honor the family of our falling, because they still to this day live with that tragedy. They still live with that loss.
I don't know where the 5 years went. But during that time, I think of Brian all the time. And like everyone else that remembers Brian, what he accomplished in his life, both professionally and personally. He was an outstanding officer. He was a terrific son and brother, and he was a great friend. I think he should be remembered as a hero because what he did, a lot of people wouldn't do. He would run to danger. He would do anything to make the people in New York safe. And, it sounds funny that you say that because it sounds like, well, everyone says that. He really did. He was an outstanding cop, and he would do anything he could, in this case, to try to get a gun off the street.
I'm happy that there's this tribute to Brian this year because it is sort of a milestone already. It's 5 years, which in some ways seems like it was a second ago, and in other ways it seems like it was 100 to 200 years ago. It's it's a weird thing. I can't really explain it, I guess, unless you go through it. And as time goes on, I want the newer men and women who join the police force to know who Brian was. And he did make the ultimate sacrifice. And it's a very tough thing for a mom and parents and family and his sister and also his girlfriend and aunts and uncles, everybody. It's a tough thing. So that being said, he did make the ultimate sacrifice, and to honor him, I just want to read a short poem. The name of the poem is I Believe. I believe your spirit is still with me. You send me signs to show me I sense you, but I can't see you. I feel you, but I can't touch you. I perceive you, but I can't hear you. Your home is in my heart, even though we're apart. You're always there within the air, and your spirit is everywhere.